fellow comic book fans. This is your host, Travis Collins, aka Duck Punch, and I'm back for another episode of Duck Punch Comics, here to review the last 4 books on our docket that came out on September 15th, 2010. Today we're going to take a look at DMZ number 57, Thor, for Asgard number 2 of 6, DC Universe Legacies number 5 of 10, and New Mutants number 17. We're going to jump straight on into the heart of things with DMZ number 57, written by Brian Wood, with art by Cliff Chiang. Now, DMZ is one of those books that, honestly, you really have to start reading from the very beginning to appreciate. It's a long, winding story about the war, and pain, and survival, and hope, and just a whole smorgasbord of other things. But mostly, it's about people trying to survive in the middle of a terrible situation, which is what this issue highlights. Now, the story is following Amina, a character we haven't seen in a while, and pretty much just a day in her life. After finding a deaf infant outside of her ramshackle apartment, she attempts to care for the child while taking a hard look at the year or two that has passed since last she appeared in the story. The issue ends with a tense standoff with a band of insurgents, one of whom is the child's mother. Now, this book has been Brian Wood's masterpiece since it started. Yes, it is very political. Yes, it is very difficult to simply pick up an issue and start reading, though I will hedge that by saying that this issue might be an exception. But if you can take the time to find either the first issues or the first few trade paperbacks of this series, it is so worth it. I constantly bemoan the fact that it took me so long to start reading this. Cliff Chiang is really good here. There's a sharp style to his art that really fits with this issue, and his use of shadow highlights the story. This is such a good book. Honestly, it's one of the best books being published. If you can be open-minded about hearing other points of view on politics or society, then you are in for a real treat with this title. I highly recommend it. Next up, Thor, for Asgard, number 2 of 6, written by Robert Roddy, with art by Simone Bianchi. Now, a few weeks ago, I praised the first issue of this series to the high heavens for its bold direction in both story and art. Well, issue 2 is here, and the story gets much, much more interesting, and the art gets much, much more impressive. Now, with the apples of immortality dying, Thor has sent envoys to use the Rainbow Bridge to go to Earth and try and start a new orchard, lest the Asgardians become mortal, and we of course can't have that happen, right? This plan is interrupted, however, by a surprise attack by the Asgardian rebels, who attack the bridge itself, and may just have murdered one of the most recognizable characters in this franchise. When the dust settles, one thing is clear. There is in fact an enemy inside of Asgard. The first issue showed us, or Roddy showed us in the first issue, that there is Asgard under siege, that the subjects of the kingdom are no longer content with the House of Odin. In this issue, he ups the ante by establishing that there is now a threat inside Asgard itself that wants to overthrow the kingdom. He also continues to build the society of Asgard, which itself is splintered between warlike and cautious, young and old, traditional, progressive. It really makes for a dynamic story that really brings the reader in. My only complaint here is the weapon that the rebels use, which seems kind of out of place with the setting, but I have no doubt that it will be explained later. Bianchi is definitely in his element with this book. The larger-than-life setting and the larger-than-life characters really allow the guy who is my favorite comic artist to shine. Thor for Asgard is admittedly an alternate universe story, but one that is still rife with great Thor moments and a sweeping story that feels right at home with the Asgardians we've all come to know and love. Pick this up. You won't regret it. Next up, DC Universe Legacies, number 5 of 10, written by Len Wein, with art by Scott Collins, George Perez, and Scott Koblish. In what has been a real guilty pleasure book for me, DC Universe Legacies returns this month to explore another period of DC's history. The dark days of the 70s and 80s, when comics began to turn from the idealism of the 60s toward more socially aware and grim, gritty realism. Our narrator is explaining how violent many of the otherwise harmless supervillains of the 60s have become, beginning with the murder of the Doom Patrol team, and getting progressively worse from there. At the same time, the heroes themselves are beginning to change, becoming more aggressive in their fighting with the supervillains, and increasing just in sheer number. But the issue culminates in the advent of a threat never before seen in comics, the quote-unquote crisis. A threat that transcended all previous expectations about just what a superhero could face. And again, the issue ends ominously, as the end of another era arrives and the unknown future waits. Now, Len Wein is just as good on this book as he has been in the previous issues. It was interesting to see, however, in this book, how the narrator's own personal story was really intertwined with that of the superheroes he's remembering. It's also interesting to see just the sense of awe and terror at the increasingly dire situations the characters find themselves either in or observing. Really fantastic work here. And as I've said before, the laundry list of artists, is justified by the sheer amount of story being told. It was actually really awesome to see the legendary George Perez back to draw some of the classics, especially his famous New Teen Titans team. Great stuff all around. It goes without saying at this point that this is a great read for new comic fans and old readers alike. Really, it's a great book that is better than it has any right to be. Check this one out, guys. Last up, New Mutants number 17, written by Zeb Wells, and artwork by Leonard Kirk. This continues to be an intriguing story about how the next generation is really of X-Men is really coming into their own and out of the shadow of their leaders like Cyclops or Professor Xavier. And while they're at it, it's also a really neat story in and of itself. Now, Cannonball and his team of New Mutants are kicked into action when team member Magic drafts them into going back to Limbo to assault Project Purgatory through the portal they've opened in that other world. The New Mutants attack Project Purgatory, but are immediately set upon by the mysterious mutant children who were brought up in Limbo. A battle begins, and things don't look good for our heroes. Zeb Wells has a fun little story here about demon-human-mutant hybrids, and I can kind of dig it. But the biggest problem I've had now is that I feel like, because I have no real background with this series prior to the Second Coming story arc or the last two issues, I have no context for a lot of this, and it feels like I missed something really important. I've debated the merits of trying to go back and find back issues, but I'm not sure it's worth it just for one story. Now, the artist Leonard Kirk is kind of weird to me. If he's drawing action or panoramic panels or just zoomed way out, he's really good. But then he closes in on faces and it just gets weird. I'm not sure what to make of it, really. I'm sticking with this story arc because it's not really a bad one, but I'm waiting for the big selling moment that will get me to commit to this. So far, I remain unconvinced, but we'll have to see. So there you go, guys, the last 4 books that came out on September 15th. Really interesting grab bag last week. I'll be back tomorrow for our wrap-up show, some final thoughts. As always, leave comments, let me know what you thought. Have a great day.